The RATIFY study was a large phase 3 multinational cooperative group-led study. The primary goal of this study was to see if the overall survival was improved when we added a FLT3 inhibitor, namely midostaurin, to standard induction, which was 3+7 in patients with newly diagnosed FLT3 ITD or FLT3 D835 mutated AML. So the study enrolled a total of 750 patients in about 100 sites, and the study did take a while, about 8 to 9 years, because 3,500 patients had to be screened to find 700 FLT3 mutated patients, since the incidence is only about 25–30%. The study results were released about 1.5 years ago, and it showed that the study did meet the primary endpoint, where the addition of midostaurin to 3+7 in FLT3 ITD as well as FLT3 D835 mutated patients was associated with improved overall survival, and was also associated with an improved response rate when all responses were taken together. And based on this, the FDA approved midostaurin to be used in combination with 3+7 induction in all newly diagnosed FLT3 mutated AML, and this is now considered to be a standard approach. So we do recommend all the physicians and academic and community physicians in the US as well as in Europe to wait for the results of the FLT3 testing and to use the midostaurin as an add-on to the standard induction they're using to improve the overall survival of their patients. The second study is the Quantum First study. So this was a large phase 3 study, this time looking at relapsed refractory patients. So the patient population was people with acute myeloid leukemia of any age who had received induction therapy and had either refractory disease, meaning they did not respond at all, or had relapse, meaning that they responded and then the disease came back. And these patients would usually be treated with standard chemotherapies, so one could use regimens like FLAG-IDA or azacitidine or low-dose cytarabine, but the outcomes have usually been dismal in the relapsed FLT3 ITD patients. So here the goal was to see whether we could use single-agent oral drug, quizartinib, which is a potent FLT3 inhibitor, versus using the traditional chemos that we have used, such as the low-dose cytarabine, decitabine, etc. And the primary endpoint again here was overall survival. This was also a multinational study, was opened in about 80 sites. A total of 380 patients were enrolled, and they were randomized to receive either quizartinib or to investigator choice. Investigator choice included low-dose cytarabine, azacitidine, decitabine, or chemo. And the primary endpoint was overall survival. The study was released a few months ago, and it showed that both the overall survival and the response rates were significantly improved with quizartinib. So the overall survival was 30 weeks as compared to 20 weeks with quizartinib as compared to traditional chemotherapy. And the response rate, which I think is the most striking, was 50% when we included all bone marrow remission rates with quizartinib as compared to only 25% with chemo. And so a lot of people say, well, you know, the survival improvement is modest, it's only 8 to 10 weeks, which I agree, but I think the key factor here is that we're using one oral agent which is very well tolerated in comparison to 3 drug chemotherapies such as FLAG-IDA or IV chemotherapy such as azacitidine. So even if me as a patient I were told we could give you one oral drug which is very well tolerated as compared to 3 drug IV chemo, which will have all the side effects of mucositis, diarrhea, nausea, infection, and even if they were equivalent, I think most of us would say I will go for the oral drug. So here you're not only seeing equivalence, you're seeing superiority. Now that being said, eventually we at MD Anderson and a lot of the other big centers believe that in the end these drugs such as quizartinib, like midostaurin, will be optimally used in combination, and a number of these studies are ongoing. But I still think today, as a single agent for relapsed FLT3 ITD, this is probably going to be our #1 choice over high-dose chemotherapy.
The implication of the current trials of FLT3 inhibitors in the daily clinical practice, I think, is first of all that, for example, in the RATIFY study, there a younger patient population was on the focus, so patients between 18 and 59 years. Whereas, for example, in the Quantum First study, there are also older patients can be included, patients between 60 and 70. That's a difference between the 2 trials. Second difference is also that, for example, in the Quantum First trial, only patients with the FLT3 internal tandem duplication can be included, whereas, for example, in the RATIFY trial, also patients with a tyrosine kinase domain mutation were included. And especially these patients benefit best from midostaurin if we look at the different results and the hazard ratios for the different mutation types. So the hazard ratio for tyrosine kinase domain mutation was much better, or even better than those for FLT3 internal tandem duplication, low or high allelic burden. There will be other trials coming up where crenolanib and also gilteritinib were compared in the first-line setting to midostaurin, the only drug so far approved for the treatment of patients with FLT3 and activating FLT3 mutations.